There's just no getting around it. This triggered me. There were a couple of really well-publicized moments that the world got to share in, i.e. just more gold than I think any of us have ever seen during a coronation. That if I'm this triggered, you can imagine someone whose past is steeped in that history, how much of a trigger that becomes. Over the decades, there have been public cries for international museums to return artifacts, particularly those originally from Africa, because we know what narrative that forms a part of. Now back to their native countries to address historical injustices. And what has this process, the discussion that's been born out of that, the repatriation looked like over the decades? Well, we're going to find out. But more importantly, what needs to happen now? We've got Annelies Kotze, Curator of Social History Collections at the Iziko Museums of South Africa, and then Senior Professor Siraj Rasool from UWC's Historical Studies Department. They join us for this discussion that probably requires about 3 or 4 years worth of study, but we are here at this moment, and the fact that we are talking about this in an editorial sense, not an overly sensationalized, and maybe a movie took us there to get to this point, but that's great. So, Prof, maybe I can start with you. What is the goal here? If you have to look at your own motivation and what drives you in this space, what is the goal of the repatriation of these cultural objects? Why is this so important?
Well, this is a very important stage in the achievement of sovereignty in the aftermath of colonialism.
Coming of age, yeah.
The coming of age, becoming independent, and acquiring the right to determine the future of your own material culture. That was acquired through looting, yeah, or through immoral means under colonial conditions. And so this is a part of a broader reckoning with the legacies of colonialism that we still live with.
I'll talk about fishing rights off the coast of an impoverished country. They'll give the entire fishing rights away to clear a little bit of their debt. The exact same system is playing out. It's not about the past, it's about how it's lived now in our current status. So I understand the relevance of it completely, but we have to do a bit of digging. And when we look back at museums, kind of have a free pass because it's a museum, it's a cultural expression, it's a no man's land for politics and sensationalizing. Yeah. But it's a representation of the politics of that time. And so many, if not all of these artifacts were probably gained through the worst, as Prof has pointed out, through war, through looting, through that kind of trade. To what extent do you think this is prevalent? Do we need to kind of look at every museum and say, okay, let's do a baseline study of what's where and just fix this? Where's your mindset?
Yeah, it's completely possible. But the thing is that, you know, we that work in the museum, we're privileged to be there. We're privileged to know where objects came from and the information on the objects. But the average person out there, like a child in school right now, doesn't even know the objects that we have in our museums. You know, so the important thing for us is to let people know what we have, because if they don't know what we have, how do they know to ask back what is theirs? You know, so that is the most important thing. And so that connection of the past and who they are now, because if you don't know where you come from, how do you know where you're going? Exactly. So that is the important thing that we're trying to do with connecting the people to the objects as well.
And young people need an anchor in the world.
That's
we need to know where we are coming from, especially in this polarized, crazy world that we exist in. What I love about history, it gives you a chance to embody it in a person. Sarah Bartman.
Yeah.
Having her remains returned, how much did that mean in your space? That must have been just an amazing personal moment in this crazy journey, but how much did that mean?
I mean, I wasn't there at the museum yet at that time. But still, you know, it was such an important thing. And when I started working at the museum and I realized that we actually had a crate which carried her coffin from Paris to South Africa, I was like, this is an amazing object that we just have to put on display. And then I did it. I put it on display at the castle, but also with the types of boxes that we have that actually hold ancestral remains in our spaces. And I focused particularly on women and children that we still have in our spaces, even though we have many more others. But I mean, to have her coffin there, it was like a representation of a successful repatriation. And I was just saying, if we can have this empty crate, we can have empty boxes. That was the most important thing.
And let's bear in mind, we are talking about not just artifacts, not coins of gold. This is our people, genetic traces of ourselves. This is us being represented. What is standing in the way here? Is it too difficult to go there? What has been stopping this process or halting this process and slowing it down?
Well, the good thing is that many of the obstacles are being overcome. Some of these are legal obstacles. France, for example, has a doctrine of inalienability, so that the nation and the state are the owners of the collections. And so a special law had to be passed for Sarah Baartman to be returned. But increasingly, European governments, especially Germany, France, in some cases are becoming amenable and open to restitution. We have already distinguished between something we can call repatriation and something that we want to insist we call restitution. Because repatriation is actually a process of European giving.
Yeah.
It's a reference to the legal processes, the diplomatic processes, the logistical processes.
The system, yeah.
Whereas restitution is a restorative process. It is part of the process of social healing and part of the process of demanding the return of our material culture. We don't refer to them as objects.
Yeah.
We don't refer to our ancestral remains as human remains, because those are the categories of museum governance. So when we talk about the existence of people in the collections of museums, we stop using these categories of governance, because what we're doing is part of a massive project of rehumanization and of making ourselves better people.
I love the fact that right now, and I know you are fighting so hard within a system that probably pushes back more than it accommodates. But just know, in the notion right now, there are thousands of kids looking at the two of you, seeing themselves represented in this battle, thinking, hang on a minute, archaeology isn't about the past. It's about the battle that's being waged right now. And what's at stake here is far beyond just wealth and gold coins and really cool stories. It's our soul, it's ourselves. And there could be no better battle to be fought. Thank you. You've just made the real life so much more exciting and so much more engaging than any movie could be. And I think that's where it's at. And I was going to ask you how to make this front and center, but you've done it. And you do it every day in your life. So thank you so, so much. I have a feeling we might have to return to this topic, because more and more people are talking about this, not as a judgment of the past, not as a projection of the future, but as how can people take ownership of themselves right now. And I love that. Ownership is always going to be a very big discussion, but addressing some of those historical wrongs, abuses, is a way to foster collaboration and understanding between nations. This is the new season, and it begins not with them handing back, but with us demanding.